On February 20th, 2022, Russia, after weeks of troop buildup and declaring a special military action, invaded Ukraine in the early morning hours. As a result, the lives of tens of thousands of military personnel on both sides and civilians have since been lost. Men, women, and children have all been erased from existence. In addition to military action, there are also reports ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands of war crimes having been committed against the Ukrainian population. Looting, SA, forced deportations, torture, and mass unalivings have all been reported. A war that Russia expected to end with a quick and decisive victory has instead morphed into a months-long struggle with no clear end in sight, mostly due to Ukrainian resistance being far more intense than expected. And we all remember those images from the early parts of the war. Civilians hunkering down in subways, shelters, basements, and basically anywhere they could find a semblance of safety during shelling and air raids. Above them, volunteers and military personnel were preparing makeshift weapons, Molotov cocktails, and getting weapons from the government. The international community has started to send weapons, food, and various other aids to assist in their war effort. Greetings, citizens of the world. I'm the Splinter, and no, this video isn't specifically about the ongoing war in Ukraine, and yet, it is. You see, I was perusing Steam just the other night in search of a new game that could provide my ADHD-riddled brain with the dopamine it so desperately craves. And that's when I came across Ukraine war stories. At first, I was upset. Who in their right mind would be callous enough to cash in on an ongoing war? So, out of curiosity, I clicked the game and really found myself intrigued. It turns out, I made the right decision. Ukraine War Stories is a free-to-play compilation of visual novels developed by Starni Games, a Ukrainian game developer. Thus far, it tells the story of the early stages of the war in 3 separate regions. Forgive my pronunciation, but they're Hostomel, Bucha, and Mariupol. And the game's plot has been inspired by the events happening right now. The first story, Hostomel, tells us the story of Oleski, Lilia, Olna, Melina, and David, all Ukrainian civilians doing their absolute best to get by in the days before, during, and after the Russian occupation of Hostomel. The first story opens with Oleski, an elderly gentleman with a bad leg, ruminating the fact that he is a former aviation engineer, just can't seem to figure out modern cell phones. His wife, Lilia, calls out to him expressing concern about announcements that Putin is making on TV, recognizing the republics and Donbas, which to her indicates he's about to invade. And attempting to calm and placate his wife and a family friend, Melina, Oleski says that it's unlikely an invasion will happen. Not long after that night, Oleski is woken from sleep to explosions in the distance, which spurs him to help Lily begin packing up to evacuate. Sadly, the war rapidly intensifies, preventing their escape. Over the course of the next several days, Oleski, Lily, Melina, and her parents, David and Ola, attempt to survive the occupation of their town. David is unceremoniously killed by Russian soldiers, shooting at really anyone they believe to be a Nazi. The remaining characters fend off invasions of their home by Russian soldiers, and they eventually manage to evacuate, all the while being mentally and emotionally scarred by the war taking place in their own backyard. Now, the story is just one of 3 currently available in the game, and the devs seem to have indicated that there will be more stories added. Overall, the game's UI is very basic, and it's clear that it's not a AAA game, but that's okay. The graphics all look hand-drawn in oil paint, which gives us the illusion that the backgrounds are actual pictures, blurred to censor and sanitize the grittier and ugly parts of living in a war zone. The music, however, has a very dark and foreboding tone, with hints of melancholy and hope. It's clear that Starni Games has definitely put some love into this, which more than makes up for the quote-unquote basicness of the game. And what I found most appropriate is that for a story such as this, the visual novel format really feels appropriate. They wanted to tell a story without the pomp and circumstance of other formats, and could they have made this a horror survival game or a flashy, explosion-filled first-person shooter? Yeah, but it feels less like they couldn't do it and more that they felt that it would be disrespectful to the innocent lives lost to turn their horror into a spectacle. And if that's the case, I wholeheartedly agree. There's no voice acting in the game, so ultimately you're going to have to do a bit of reading. But I can promise you this game will hold your attention. It will show you the strife people not unlike yourself are experiencing now in this very moment. And before I provide any of my own personal commentary, I do implore you to visit Starni Games and other Ukrainian game developers. Check out their catalog on Steam and consider trying out one of their other games. But I do want to leave you with some personal commentary. This game brought home to me a war that's happening thousands of miles away on the other side of the world. As so often happens, eventually major media resources get bored with a story regardless of its importance. Right now it's October, and we hear less and less about the actual war, and more about domestic political turmoil and infighting over whether the US should be providing weapons and support to Ukraine, on top of an increasingly more deranged Putin with his finger on the proverbial nuclear trigger. Now, this channel isn't about politics, it's about gaming. However, every so often, you encounter a game that is both entertaining and informative. This is why I am speaking of Ukraine war stories. These stories, like I said, are based on actual events. There have been documented SAs and mass unalivings for months. In such an uncertain time globally, we should all begin to look deep inside ourselves and ask, is this the world I want future generations to grow up in? And regardless of how one might answer that question, we should all strive to protest and push back against any encroaching tyranny. And now this is where I, as a new YouTuber, would normally ask you to like, share, and subscribe. But instead, I would ask you to visit Starni Games on Steam. Donate to one of the various charities that support Ukraine, engage your local politicians, and tell them that you, as a citizen in whatever city, state, or country, want them to do anything in their power to show would-be despots that you will not accept anything less than a firm stance against authoritarianism and hate. Until next time, YouTube, I'm the Splinter. Be safe out there.